All right, so it looks like we are live. The new era of the MEC with our new partnership with B Club. Let me just make sure we're live before I'm just start talking to nobody. So this first one's gonna start off a little less smooth than probably I'd hope. Okay, we are live. All right, cool. All right, so today is the first live MEC session with our new BeatStars partnership, and I had to start it off with a heavy hitter that I just got introduced to recently through a good friend of ours, Brian Calhoun. But I've heard the name over the years. I've seen some of the work that he's done over the years, and we've only had one conversation prior to this, so this conversation is going to be educational for me in terms of me getting to know Jonathan better. But today we have Jonathan Azu, who's the founder of Culture Collective. So we're going to talk about that. But welcome and thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much. You've been well and your family's been healthy.
Yeah, not healthy. Definitely. That's definitely the first priority. Just making sure the fam is safe and healthy during this ridiculous year. It's only been 6 months. That's crazy.
Yeah, we can only hope that the second half of the year is better than the first.
Yeah, well, I posted on the MEC page yesterday. I was like, it's amazing that it's been only 6 months, but that also means we got 6 months to turn this thing around. You know.
Yeah.
And
No, it's true.
Yeah, make it a positive year. So
it is true. It kind of parlays into what you all do so well. Is I told somebody the other day. I said, obviously, it was a big surprise to us. I'll never forget the week that the world really changed, and that Monday things had just changed. And it was a surprise to everybody how acute it was. But we know what to expect now, the back 6 months of the year. So now it's about how do you want to use your time to plan for it.
Right.
In looking into 2021.
Right. Well, let's jump into this. Let's first start with what you do currently, and then we'll go back in terms of like the road traveled to get to this point. But let people know what you're currently working on in the recent past.
Yeah. So in the last year, I launched my own company, Culture Collective, and in our like some of the press said when I launched it, I did it for reasons bigger than music. I spent many years, and we'll cover it. But I spent many years in entertainment. I've worked in radio, I've worked in live events, and then I helped run one of the larger management companies out there. And as I've elevated into C-level positions, and I found myself in very influential rooms in the business world, I found that I again and again was the only person of color, and maybe one or two, three people of color in these rooms. And when you're migrating through that journey, what once was, I guess that's the way it is, turned into now I know why it is. I'm starting to understand now that I've gotten older, and I'm starting to see some of the systemic issues and looking back at how I was able to elevate through the entertainment industry as a on the business side. And I just wanted to be an example. I wanted to be an example of somebody that started their own company that is of color, that works with artists and employs people, where diversity and inclusion is a big on the forefront of how we decide who we're working with and who works for the company. And that was a year ago. It was a year ago in March. So it's been wild to see where the world's at today. And some of the things I talked about when I launched have really come full circle. And I've got a lot of phone calls from former colleagues and friends and whatnot, kind of saying, I really now, it's more crystal clear to me why you did what you did.
Right. So let's just briefly talk about some of the names. I mean, because sometimes people need to be alerted by some of the names that you've been attached to. Like, why should I listen to this guy? Like, I've never heard.
Yeah.
Just some of the names of the artists that you've worked with. Just go ahead and.
Yeah. In the previous years, I've worked with Kool and the Gang. I've worked with Miguel. I've worked with Lecrae, Anita Baker, Michelle Williams, Luke James, Leon Thomas, Corey Henry, Emily King, on and on. And then prior to that, I was general manager of Red Light Management. So Red Light has about 200 plus artists, and it's the longtime manager of the Dave Matthews Band, but they've also got, you know, Lionel Richie, and when I was there, we had Tiesto and Marshmello and a bunch of other, you know, artists of all different levels, and managers. And then before that, I was at Superfly, and we were the co-founders of Bonnaroo and Outside Lands, and a bunch of other really great festivals. And they also had a integrated marketing department where they would work integrating brands into the festival space to bring them to life at festivals, and then also service those brands all year long as an agency. So, and then prior to that, I was in radio. So, kind of had this interesting intersection of like media, live events, and talent management. Really makes up the core of who I am and what I've done professionally.
Nice, nice. So even before that, like, what did you always want to be in music? Like, did you start off, you know, saying, "Hey, I want to be in music. I love music. I want to work with artists." Like, so even before that first job, you know, what was the mindset, and did you go to school? Mm-hmm. Like, what was that whole mindset and process?
Yeah, I've always been a fan of music. I have older siblings. I've always been around music that I was either, you know, very much like of the time of my generation, but also a generation or two above me because I had older siblings, so I'd be exposed to what they were listening to. Grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Pretty diverse family, if you will. My mother was from New Orleans. My father's from Nigeria. You know, yeah, I have a twin sister. We were born in the United States. My brother and sister were born over in Africa. We settled in St. Louis because that's where my father went to school. And so I was sitting in the Midwest. I used to play football. Thought I was going to go to college to play football. Got into Drake University, and blew my knee out. Went to the university anyway, and then I'll never forget it. My sophomore year, we packed a car and we drove a couple hours over to see George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars perform. And it was the 25th anniversary of the mothership. And that ship dropped from that lighting rig, you know, the smoke, and the door opened up and George came out. And that was it. I was sold, man. I was like, this is what I want to do. Nice. So it's all about the live show, the performance, music. And that was really the birth of my really kind of like the trigger that said, this is what I want to do professionally. And then I went on I snuck backstage that night and I met the producers of the show. And about a year later, I produced my first concert, which was George Clinton. I brought it to my university. And wow. that went into producing more shows over my tenure at school. My senior year, I produced the Dave Matthews Show. And that was it. You know, that was the spark. And I interned at Live Nation over the summer. And they got me a position at CBS Radio when I graduated from college in St. Louis. But my whole goal was to live in New York. I wanted to live in New York. It was all about being in New York. And I, again, just taking risk. Somebody had introduced me to somebody that worked at CBS Radio corporately. And at that time, radio was becoming decentralized. And so companies like Clear Channel and CBS were buying up a bunch of radio stations, and CBS had a portfolio of about 180 radio stations, and they had hired John Sykes, who's now over at, you know, runs iHeartMedia, but he was running CBS at the time. John has a long track record with MTV Networks. He's kind of one of the founding fathers of MTV Networks, and he was hiring a bunch of music people to work for him. And one of the people that he hired, this guy named David Goodman, and we had a mutual relationship. Friend connected us, and I flew to New York, and I pitched him on who I was and what I wanted to do, and he hired me, and he hired me out of St. Louis. I went to New York, and that was it. I mean, everything started happening at that point going forward tenfold. Meeting people, experiencing things, cutting my teeth. I even moonlighted as a manager while I was at CBS at night. I was, you know, helping different artists, you know, do shows and stuff like that, just learning the trade. And that was the real birth of my music career.
So just that piece, obviously, like, moving to New York is something that you really wanted to do. You kind of needed to be in the mix. Has that changed at all? Does somebody need to be in New York or LA? Because I think that question comes up a lot. You know, if you want to be a manager or artist, like, do you have to be in these places from your perspective?
It's a good question. If anything, I think that if it wasn't for me being in New York, you know, I wouldn't have built my network, because ultimately I think one of my superpowers is my relationships. I have a lot of relationships in various sectors of business, not just music, because you'd be surprised on how they all play on each other, especially the finance world, right? And what finance, what finance has on the entertainment industry. Whether it's New York or LA, I would probably say the biggest takeaway is that showing up is 90% of it, and the ability to be able to be at places, be out at shows. I always tell people, that are coming up, to stay out too late. And that comment doesn't mean stay out too late partying. That's comment like stay out too late connecting with people. Some of the best conversations that I had, some of the best relationships that I built were done not on a conference call, not in a proper meeting. It was done socially. It was at a festival, or it was at a show, or it was after a show at a music venue, a small music venue, seeing an up and coming artist, and everyone's hanging out at the bar after the show, talking. And those are some of the best relationships that I built, that I still carry with me till this day. And it wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have been in New York. Now, can you do it in Los Angeles? I do believe, but I think cities like New York sometimes are more conducive to that social experiment of hanging out, because there's that commonality of like everyone's going to jump into a cab or onto a train. So, the whole let's jump in the cab together, or let's walk to the train. Those things, those kind of moments happen in New York. Don't tend to happen in Los Angeles. But guarantee you they couldn't happen in St. Louis.
Right.
That I promise you.
So what advice do you give to the person that is not the life of the party, that's not very social, but still wants to build and connect with solid people? Do you have any advice for those that are a little bit more reserved, or is it just like, hey, you can't be that way, you got to get out there? Like,
you got to get out your comfort zone. I always say there's this margin right in the middle, and you've got comfort and you've got danger. And then right in the middle here is high performance. So you got to figure out how to stay in that high performance zone. Sometimes you lean on comfort, sometimes you lean on danger, but it's razor thin. And you just got to stay on it. So I would just challenge somebody that's more of an introvert to, to get out there more and have the conversations that may feel uncomfortable, right? Just because of the setting, but just push through it. They'll get better.
And then what about the folks that aren't in LA or New York and probably not going to be there in the super near future? Or do you have any tips on ways to connect? Because obviously we're much more connected, whether it's via, video conferencing or just the internet. And, I'm not going to date you and ask you to tell me how old you were, but we didn't have as much connectivity.
Yeah.
And I think that, I
was gonna say connectivity allows you to do business quicker and faster, but that high touch relationship is so important. Once this all comes back online again, listen, when I got my job in New York, it wasn't like I went online and there was an opening. I had to fly there and hit the pavement and meet people, even though I didn't live there, right? So I would just encourage people, if you're not in those cities, be there seasonally, right? Pick pockets of the month or of the summer or whatnot to go out there, and because you'd be surprised, people will be like, "Hey, yeah, I'd love to connect. Let me know when you're in the city. All right, let me know when you're in LA." So you can't wait for someone to say, "Well, don't come to LA or come to New York because I have an opportunity for you." Sometimes you just got to show up,
right,
and say, "I'm here. I'm here for 2 weeks. I'm going to be doing a bunch of meetings, sleeping on friends' couches. Make it work."
And so what advice, obviously you're a very busy individual. You probably get hit up by a lot of people that want to connect, want to have that lunch and whatnot. What, if it's somebody that you don't know or have a tie to, if somebody reaches out to you kind of cold, what might pique your interest about the way somebody reaches out? Is there any advice you can give, from that standpoint?
It's a good question. You'd be surprised, honestly. You'd be surprised that you sometimes you have people that'll hit you up on LinkedIn. Hey, I want to connect. I heard about you. I want to connect, which is great. Persistence, right? Persistence is a key thing. But I always say not from a level of annoyance, but from a level of just tactfully persistent, right? And impressions matter too. some of the relationships I have with counterparts of mine or people that have been in business for a very long time, when I see them, I've just had more impressions around them because they've seen me at conferences or they've seen me at festivals, or they've seen me out, connecting with people through webinars. So when I see them, it's like, hey, hello, how are you? I may not really know them, but the impression in their mind is there because I've shown up enough, right, in worlds that they've been around, that there's a warm relationship there versus a cold relationship. So I think, sometimes that's part of it too, is reaching out to people, but also showing up at places where they're at. But that persistence thing is definitely key. I mean, I go back to, if I wouldn't have snuck backstage at the George Clinton concert, not that I'm telling people to sneak backstages at shows, but ultimately I had a vision. My friends thought I was crazy. I'm like, no, I have a vision, and I'm not sneaking backstage to kick it. I'm sneaking backstage because I've had this epiphany. I want to produce this show at my university. And I've had that happen before. I did a conference recently, or maybe a year ago. I think it was in Los Angeles, and back in the green room area where they have all of the people that are at the conference, some students walked up to me from Berkeley, and they're like, we love all the artists that you work with. We just would love to figure out how to, we'd love to intern, let us know. We want to just thank you. And that was, I don't know how they got back there, but they got back there.
So now there's definitely been a consistent theme amongst all of our guests that have been successful in the music industry of just like a level of proactivity, just kind of like a willingness to go out there and get it, be present, be proactive, and, take those risks that you're talking about.
The thing to remember too, when I graduated from college, I thought, I'd done a lot of amazing things, but ultimately when you get out into the workforce, you find out that the person before you and after you had similar resumes. Like they all produced shows, they all, were on the entertainment board or whatever it was. Right. So you have to, you got to be aggressive.
For sure. So when it comes to, obviously you're doing more management, label ownership now versus, producing shows. So I'm assuming that is where more of your interest lies, and that's what you enjoy doing more, or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that if anything, I like to consider myself a marketer at heart and a generalist. We manage artists' careers, so we are the ones that are responsible for developing the blueprint and the roadmap for growth. And we sit right next to the artist and advise them and help consult and activate against those milestones across that roadmap. But it also includes live shows. Now, we may not be on the side of actually producing the show, but we're very much next to them on what their production elements of the show are going to be, right? And it's important for us, and that's the other thing, is my diversification of experiences. My background has allowed me to bring different perspectives to the table, and I that's another thing that I really encourage younger executives to do, is to diversify their background. I think it's great that if you have a passion for one thing, but you should get the perspective from working at different industries that have commonality. Because I have the ability to be able to pick up the phone and say, all right, we're going to do a radio campaign for an artist. Great. You know what? Let me call a couple program directors that I know from back when I was in radio and get their take on this song or this artist. I literally just did a program this last week with Luke James and my friends from Superfly, who are producing a small business live thing with TikTok. And it was like a full circle thing. I'm like on the email with all these folks from Superfly that I once worked with, and it felt very comfortable, right? Because I know them, because I worked with them, because I'd spent some time in that facet of live business. So it's important to have that diversification, because you migrate with your pack, and as you continue on and you work in different industries, your relationships will grow exponentially.
Right, for sure. So the artists that you've worked with, I'm sure it's a mixed bag in terms of like independent and artists that are signed to majors. You've worked with, so many different artists. The artists that you're currently working with, are more of them signed to major labels, or are they more of them independent?
They tend to lean more on the independent side. I think that the spectrum, it's interesting because artists have the bar of entry into putting music out has never been lower. the
Mm-hmm.
ability for you to be able to record a song and upload it and have it out there. And I think that a lot of artists fall within a spectrum of relationships in the recording industry side. One end of it is TuneCore, right, or DistroKid. The
Mm-hmm.
other end of it is major label. You know, ultimately, if you get that major label involved in your career early in your career, the more they're going to want to have a piece of everything, the 360 thing. So you'll
Right.
see a lot of artists, and I advise too, is they slowly go up the ladder, right, rung by rung, and as they go up, their 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 stock increases. So therefore, you can negotiate a better deal if you get to that other end of the spectrum for a major record label to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have one client that initially started at TuneCore, then went to a distribution deal, and went from a distribution deal to an independent label, and then we'll see what happens next. But it could be a major. But that deal with the major is going to be very different than if they would have started, years ago with them.
Right. So when we just had this discussion on the podcast that we just dropped today in terms of like, when should an artist seek management? And I know that sometimes people will say, when you have something to manage, and I don't necessarily agree with that. And there's no right answer to this, but how would you answer somebody to say, hey, when do you think I should seek management?
I think it's when you're busting at the seams. There's so much you can do on your own as an artist. I personally, as a manager, I like to be able to jump on line and see that an artist is living their lives as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're on social media platforms. They're either putting up music through, even if it's SoundCloud, not distributed through the DSPs, but they're doing things to exhibit themselves as an artist. To me, that shows the willingness to say, you know what, hell or high water, partnership or no partnership, I'm going to be an artist. Whether it's one fan or a million fans, I want to be an artist. I've dedicated myself to it. Because I always say that it's just hard to get somebody from ground floor to the middle of the room, sometimes as much as it is from middle of the room to the top.
Right.
And I'd rather spend my time on that second tier, right? How do I get you from where you're at right now to the top?
Right. No, I agree. When I was running my label, I mean, there's a lot of criteria, especially when you're running a small label, because I feel like, we can't miss, right? Every time we bring on an artist, I feel like that artist has to do something, right? Because we don't have the money like the majors that can place a bunch of bets,
Mm-hmm.
So all of our time, all of our resources that go into an artist that we bring on, I feel like, that artist kind of has to work out. So for you, the way you describe Culture Collective, it's both, and it's management for some, but it's management and label services for some. Is that how you would describe the?
Yeah, interesting question. So what we launched as a management company, and the beauty of owning your own company is, you have the accountability, responsibility, and authority to make decisions that you think are best for the company.
Mm-hmm.
And Luke James was signed to Island Records, and Dave Massey had left Island, and we saw it as an opportunity. Who he had initially signed Luke to release Luke from the record label and allow him to do things independently. Great partnership that we had, Grammy nominated. Things were really in a good place, but we felt like this was a better opportunity for Luke to get a real grip on his music and what he wanted to do with his career. So anyway, we negotiated the release. And then at that point, Luke James has multiple options, right? He can, again, that spectrum. He could throw it up on TuneCore, DistroKid, right? Or he can say, let's negotiate with a major label and go back down that road. That's the arc.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were talking, and as somebody, again, that, from a company perspective, we have the ability to really make it a one-of-one solution for an artist. So what would the world look like if we put this out independently? We partnered with Culture Collective, and we developed a label, a distribution partnership. So I went to InGrooves, and who I've done some work with in the past with some other artists, and have had some success with them. And we were able to develop a distribution channel for Culture Collective. And so we in turn worked with Luke James on developing a relationship between Culture Collective and Luke from a label standpoint, and we released the music. To Feel Love was released through Culture Collective, and I'll say it was our first release as a quote unquote label. Things moved much quicker. I've had a lot of success with record labels, but things take time. It takes time to get calls back. It takes time sometimes, even if it's just because it's 5 on a Friday, you're not going to get an answer until Monday because the label's closed, right?
Right.
When management and label are the same person and we're talking to the artist every single day, Saturdays and Sundays anyway, things moved a lot quicker. And we put out a beautiful body of work. And we were lucky enough to get it out before the world changed, right? The album was out and we toured, did the Soul Train Awards, did a bunch of sold out dates throughout the country, put out a video, shot a video, the whole nine, and then the world changed. But it's definitely a model that we're looking more and more at for our artists, because things just move quicker. Now, that being said, my goal as a manager is to make sure on the next album, Luke partners with who he should partner with for success based upon how he defines it, because success is defined by the eye of the beholder.
Right.
We may end up putting it out. We may end up going to a major, right? But the good news is that we're coming off of a foundation of a really good, successful launch independently with this project. And I think it's a Grammy Award-winning album. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the voting members out there will see it the same.
Yeah. Now that pace is crucial. I'm working with an artist right now who's not necessarily signed to a major, but has been a really big artist, and it's kind of like a major, but just being on an email thread of like 15 people and like seeing the emails go back and forth, and the only thing that they're talking about is what time they can get on a video conference the next day. So like the whole day is gone because all these emails going back and forth about what time like when you're working independently, I just pick up the phone and be like, yo, like, let's get this knocked out. What album do you like? The album art? Do you not like it? What needs to be changed? Let's go. And that process seems to be like a 2 or 3 day process in a major label situation sometimes.
Well, it's interesting. A friend of mine's on a major and has been trying to get a project out for a while, and has watched me get Luke released from a major, negotiated and figured out our deal with Ingrooves Universal, and finished the album and put it out. It charted at radio, did all the award shows, and this artist is still waiting to put their music out. And they're just like, wow, how are you able to do all that independently with our small, nimble, quick, dedicated team? And I got this big company behind me and I can't get my album out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's partly, there's probably people on the email thread that are chiming in that don't even need to be there, number one. But then they're working with so many other artists that they're trying to slot you into this, for the video con or whatever we need feedback on. So it just delays everything. And something like that would have been a headache if I had to continue to do, because we, the way we came up, we just did everything ourselves, and it was just a lot of times it's harder, but it's so much faster and inefficient. You brought up the Grammys. And I don't think a lot of people understand kind of how that process works. So can you just shed some light on what it takes to win a Grammy or to even be considered? Because I don't think a lot of people know.
Yeah, the Grammys, they set a certain window when music has to be put out. And actually that window was moved up last year. It used to be end of September, now it's end of August. So by August 30th or 31st, that's when a body of work or song has to have been out in the marketplace in order to be eligible for the following year. And the Grammys have committees, and those committees are broken up by genre. And when you submit your material, be it an album or a song, you're submitting to certain categories. So that's one of the challenges but things that we think about on the manager side and artist side is what categories are we submitting the song for? Because you want to make sure that you want to make sure you can be competitive in that category, that music sonically is that category. Because sometimes what ends up happening is you'll submit, and then those committees will meet and they'll say you don't belong in this category. We're going to move you to another.
Mm.
So there is a little bit of a, there's a curtain on how that process works.
So who's allowed to submit, and where are you submitting to? Like,
to the Recording Academy.
okay.
If you're an art, if you put out music, anybody can submit. Anybody can submit, right? But ultimately, the voting members tend to be, one, they're former Grammy Award winning artists themselves, or they're executives that have close ties with the Recording Academy or have been attached to record releases in the past. So they're typically very aware of who are the artists that are out there and the bodies of work that they're working on. It's definitely not a popularity thing per se. But like what I was going to say though is the Recording Academy has been going through a lot over the last year. So if anybody's been, kind of reading up on it, on exactly what the voting practices are and how they work, there's definitely an element of mystery to it, of what happens once these things hit committees. Right. And then also another element of because there is an award show, and that award show does have advertisers, right? And those advertisers will pay a higher dollar if there's higher ratings on the award show. So there is an element of how does that all tie together? But ultimately, it does mean a lot to a recording artist to know that your peers have recognized your work as being the best of the best for that past calendar year. And it has, and to me, it has a great impact on other aspects of the business. And Emily King, who's a client, was nominated for 2 Grammys: Best Engineered Album, Non-Classical, for her album, and then also Best R&B Song. And we had just announced the tour the week after the Grammy nomination. And I will tell you, she sold more tickets for that tour than she's ever sold before. Like, the whole tour was sold out before we even started the run.
Nice.
Because we placed it right after Grammy nominations, and she went on tour. She actually started touring the week after the Grammys. So we just, it had a huge impact on her ticket sales.
Nice.
And streams as well.
Nice. So I do want to open it up I have one more question, and then I'm going to go ahead and start taking questions from the chat. So probably the only drawback from this format versus our other format is that we used to bring people live on webcam to be able to show their face, ask their questions. Now we're not able to do that, but we are still going to take questions. All you need to do is type your question into the comment. Obviously, if there's a lot of them, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll select a few of them so that you guys can ask some things that maybe I didn't cover. But the one thing that I did want to ask is, in terms of finding artists to either manage or potentially sign from a label aspect, how are you going about doing that? Are you like on the internet? Do you take referrals, other people putting you on to artists? Like, how is that working now?
It's a combination. I mean, referrals is definitely one of the things. I mean, honestly, a lot of attorneys and agents will call saying, hey, I have an artist that, needs help. But referrals is a big thing. And we don't do, obviously I'm a music fan. So if I hear something and I love it, I'm going to jump on and try to figure out who's next to it. Right. Or go to Instagram and find out who's following it. But referrals is a big component of who we look at.
Got you. And I don't see any questions just yet, because I got a lot more. So don't worry. But again, go ahead and I saw some questions a lot earlier. I could scroll up and grab them, but I wasn't quite ready for questions yet. Do you have any advice because I think that I haven't really come across that many like young up and coming managers that were like super sharp, right? And I think that, that because it's not really a structured, I guess you can work at a management company as an assistant to a manager or something like that. But what would you say makes a quality manager, or what should young up and coming managers be working on so that they ensure success, into the future?
No, it's a great question. It's one of the reasons why I started Culture Collective. And one of the things I saw systemically that was an issue for people of color is that, you didn't find a lot of people of color specifically in senior manager roles at the bigger shops, be it a Red Light or an Azoff or Vector or whatnot. And when I looked at it, I think one of the big reasons why is that those companies tend to hire or streamline interns into positions and they eventually become managers. But if those interns or those lower level positions don't have people of color, then they never become managers. And I do think that it's important to have more of an institutional experience in being a manager. It's not something you have to be licensed to do, right? Like an agent. So it's important that you find yourself in a situation where you are attached to a senior manager and you're learning how to be a manager, how it works. And more importantly, you're learning how to run the business as an entrepreneur. And that's the other thing that I found was really missing with a lot of younger managers was that they may have clients whose business is in a really good place, right? Because their clients' music is on the air and they're selling out tours. But if you ask to look at their own business, look under the hood of their business, it would be a mess because they didn't learn the entrepreneurial skills of running a small business.
Right.
And that's important as well. That comes when you're around other people that have done it right. So I encourage that, again, every summer of your college career, you should be interning. When you graduate, even if you're managing an artist, you should attach yourself to a management company so you can learn the process of managing. And if you can't get a job at a management company, get a job at an agency that works with a management company so you can understand the business from that perspective. But it's important to get that experience.
For sure. All right, we got a bunch of questions coming in now. Let me go ahead and see. Got some highlighting. It says, what are some of the things we can do to counteract the corona outbreak, setting back face-to-face encounters as far as networking? What would you suggest?
Well, I'm going to answer that question on two sides. From a manager artist perspective, I think we all need to start thinking through how we're engaging with our fans in a digital way. There's a lot of different options out there, and I think you saw in the beginning everybody was kind of doing everything. But I think we all need to get comfortable with, all right, how is my artist going to connect with fans going forward? What's that platform going to be? Even when the world gets turned back on, you're going to want to have that element of connections. I don't know if it's Patreon. We've done work with Patreon; they've been great. Or other, you've got to develop that avenue with your artist and their fans. As far as networking, I've been doing a lot of these, and I've been noticing as I'm seeing right now in the chat, people are throwing in their contact information, saying, "Hey, hey everybody, good to be on this webinar. This is who I am. This is what I do. Feel free to connect with me." Digital presence is another big thing. You should make sure you are on LinkedIn, you are on Twitter, you are on Instagram. And, again, just as much as I said, I want to make sure an artist is putting themselves out there as an artist, you want to make sure as a music executive that you're putting yourself out there as a music executive. And you have your digital presence is of such, and you're connecting with people on that level.
For sure. No, great response. Let me see. Since BeatStars is primarily a producer community, although it's grown substantially, it's more inclusive than just producers, but we should address some producer specific questions. He says, then this is Esquire Music 111. He says, have any of your referrals ever came from producers, or have any producers reached out to you in terms of up and coming talent?
Yeah. Yeah, short answer is yes. In fact, a lot of the artists I work with are producers, but they're just primarily known for their own artistry. There's a bunch of artists we work with that are producers. And they produce material for other artists.
Good stuff. All right. My thing glitched a little bit. Okay, I'm starting my own independent label in Portugal. I have no experience whatsoever. From now, just focusing on the quality. My music is actually getting good. I just want to know what to do or what not to do when you're just starting out releasing songs.
I would pick up our good friend Brian Calhoun, his book, things like this Entrepreneur Club, Don Passman's book. I would start to research on what other smaller labels, what they did and what they did right, what they did wrong in setting themselves up. Get academic about it. At the end of the day, the case studies are out there. So study the game and take the bits and pieces that you want to apply towards your independent label.
Yeah, and I would say continue getting, because I think a lot of young artists and producers, like they stop honing their craft. So I think you're doing the right thing, just continuing to get better, like better the quality of what you're doing, is really going to help in the long run. Because I think sometimes artists are quick to just kind of, oh, how do I market my music? How do I market my music? Forgetting that the music is part of the marketing. If you've ever taken like a legit business course, price, product, place, promotion, the product is part of the marketing. And I think that, a lot of young people try to rush the product out there. And it might be some short-lived success, but I think in order to have longevity, having the talent and the ability to continue to refine and reinvent your product as times change, or as you are, advancing the trends in music. And you only have the ability to do that if you are super talented at what you do.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I was watching the BET Awards last night, and my wife and I were talking about like longevity in the music career, in the music business. And it's interesting because they were recapping 20 years of award shows, so they were going back and pulling artists from years past that are still relevant today, right? And you should do that sometime. Just go on to YouTube or whatever and pull up an old AMAs, old Grammys, and look at the performances and the artists that are winning awards and see if they're still around today. And because in order to be around today, they had to evolve and change and study the game and grow and diversify what they do, not just focusing on becoming a performer. Sometimes it's becoming a producer or a writer. All those are super important. So that studying the game and longevity is a big thing, because I personally like to work with clients I know that in 20, 30 years still have will have real careers, real situations still going on.
Right. No, for sure. So with Culture Collective, what does that brand represent to you, and what does it, or what is the story that you're trying to tell, people that are just getting familiar with the brand? Like, what is it about?
So it's bigger than music for us. It goes back to why we started the company, was the ability to think about diversity and inclusion as it relates to who we work with and who we hire. So if you look at our artist set, they actually everyone's of color, which I think is a very it's a very, when you look at the other management companies that are out there, especially the management companies that where I came from, it's very, very different. So that's a big part of how we think about who we work with. And we also, from a like-minded standpoint, the artists that we work with are really encapsulating their own culture and bringing it to life in the way that they envision it, that still lifts it up. It's all positivity. I my mother sent me a photo of when I was like 16 or 17 years old. I hadn't seen it in a while. I had a Public Enemy shirt on, and it's like I think back to, I was a big Public Enemy fan, and I think back to the culture that Public Enemy was. They opened up the award show last night, and music with a message is a big part of this too, right? Working with artists that where again, music is a message and it inspires and impacts people.
For sure. For sure. Let me take another question from the chat. Do you think let me see and put it back up. Do you think it's important for producers and artists to network and build a good amount of relationships first before building a huge fan base? That way you know who to access for when the time is right.
I was reading this question again. I mean, I think it's important to build relationships in general and not always think about what is that relationship gonna do for me at that moment in time. Never burn a bridge, always build a relationship. You just never know how it's going to come full circle. I was telling somebody this story the other day. Emily King performed at Music Cares, which is one of the biggest fundraisers that the Recording Academy puts on. It happens the Friday before the Grammys, and usually they're honoring an artist. So this past year it was Aerosmith. So it's a bunch of artists doing Aerosmith songs. Greg Gaines was the music director, and it's a pretty heavy room. If you've ever been to this thing, I mean, it's the largest fundraiser in music, and it's the who's who of the music industry. Probably 1,000 people in a room. Black tie, great event, raised a lot of money. And I was like, I really want Emily to perform this. She's nominated for 2 Grammys. There's a lot of people that still don't know who Emily King is. And when I was like, all right, that's my goal. How can I go about doing it? And who I need to connect with to make sure she's considered for it. And Michael McDonald, who is founder of Mick Management, was recently appointed as the chairperson for Music Cares. And I reached out to Michael and said I really wanted Emily to be considered. So he circulated it amongst his team, and she was selected as one of the artists to be on the show. Emily's lights out, phenomenal, right? So she belonged up there. But how do I know Michael? I've known Michael for years through the business, but I actually first met Michael because he was the tour manager for Dave Matthews when I was in college. So he may not remember that, but I remember that, and I remember working with him on the show. And he may not remember me, but I guarantee if it was a bad experience, he would have remembered me. Right? Okay. So that kind of goes to show you, like, full circle moment, even for me, all these years later. I've kept this relationship with Michael, and it started then. And we've done work with each other throughout our career, but this was the one thing where I called him up and said, I really want her to be considered, and he helped facilitate it to get done. It was the right thing to get. It wasn't a put, because she's phenomenal, but ultimately it definitely wasn't a, that annoying kid from college all those years ago that was nasty or whatever. So you never want to burn a bridge. You always want to build a relationship.
Right. And I'll weigh in on this question too. Like, I don't think it's, an either or. You should be building your fan base as you're building solid relationships, and I think timing has a lot to do, and kind of what Jonathan just spoke to in terms of like timing and patience with networking. What we realize is that, you can build some relationships with people now, but sometimes your fan base gives you the opportunity to build the relationship. Because I know eventually, like, once our numbers started going up, that got the attention of people, and we weren't mad at that. I got it. I was like, we just weren't, we just didn't have the value to that person or to get that person's attention until, they saw that we were doing certain things. And sometimes people get mad at that. They're like, hey, you weren't rocking with me then, why are you rocking with me now? It, put that ego to the side. But numbers do get people's attention, and that's just the way it works in this industry. Sometimes, you're going to be able to build with some people without a huge fan base, for sure.
And some people are rooting for you too, even if you don't have the numbers. Some people are like, you know what, I'm rooting for that person. I can't wait for that album to drop. And there's also those artists, what I would call the artists with a capital A, right? They're the ones that maybe aren't going to be Billboard #1, but the artist that is Billboard #1 wants to work with them, right? Because the artistry is at such a level.
For sure. Well, I think this was definitely a dope first session to start the new partnership with BeatStar. Like I said, I had to bring in a heavy hitter, and I've learned a lot through this discussion. So Jonathan, thank you for joining us and dropping so many gems. Can you let them know where to find you, and then maybe we'll put the website in the chat. Culture.
Yeah. It's a website's www.cultureco.co. And it's Culture Co. At all other social handles, and then you can find me at Jonathan Azu on Instagram, or at JAZU on Twitter, and Jonathan Azu on LinkedIn. And just leave you with this is there's a lot going on in the world right now, and I think that we're kind of in a little bit of the great equalizer, in the sense that we've all had to stop what we were doing in our business. We had to come off the road, rethink how we're going to put music out, rethink how we're going to connect with fans. And really, it's those that are really dedicated and use this as a time to stay innovative. And again, use this time to plan, to set yourself up, not only for your clients, but for yourself. Will really produce great results when this all comes back online. So I encourage everybody to keep your head in the game, keep mentally focused, and all ships rise, support each other out there.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll stay connected. I'll be in touch, and maybe at some point, you can come back and update us on all the success that I'm sure Culture Collective is going to have in the near future. So,
thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending our first MEC session. DJ Payne 1 will be live on Thursday with the Beat Club, and then I'll be back next week. I believe we have Steven from SoundCloud. So we'll be talking with him, but we're going to keep these rocking. Thank you once again, Jonathan, and I am out of here. Peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.